Hello everyone, welcome to this week's instalment of Living History. And today is an episode I think you will all greatly enjoy. It's a story that's fascinating to people all around the world, the story of Adolf Hitler, and in particular his last days in a bunker in Berlin in April 1945, just before it fell to the Soviets. Now, the story of Hitler's death and the last days of Adolf Hitler is probably the original conspiracy theory. Over the decades, we've heard outrageous stories that he escaped to Argentina and lived out his life in peace and quiet in a small village in Argentina. We've heard that he didn't die in this bunker, that the Russians covered it up and they actually captured him and took him off to a gulag. A whole range of stories about what happened to Hitler. But in recent years, a French journalist by the name of Jean-Christophe Brisard and his Russian-American colleague were actually granted unprecedented access to the Russian archives in Moscow. They were able to go into these archives, which had been kept under lock and key by the KGB since the end of the Second World War, and delve into these archives and find some absolutely remarkable things that related to the last days of Hitler. In addition to a heap of documents and interviews and documentary evidence, they found photographs, but in particular, they found some artifacts which help really bring the story to life. They found some pieces of timber which supposedly had come from the sofa that Hitler had committed suicide on, still with bloodstains on them that could be analysed. But most importantly, they found some human remains that the Russians had discovered outside Hitler's bunker in 1945. They found a fragment of a skull with a bullet hole in it, and they found some teeth which had some very unique dental work done on them and some very unique bridging work and false teeth, which painted a picture about what happened to Adolf Hitler in his final days. So this is unprecedented access these two journalists had to these Russian archives. It's never been available before. And it was wonderful to hear from them about the work that they'd done. So I spoke in this interview to Jean-Christophe Brisard, the French journalist involved. Now, I have to say I'm very grateful to him for coming on the program. English is not his first language. He has a strong French accent. But I'm sure you'll agree that it was worth speaking to him and hearing what he has to say. And even though he sometimes struggled to express the emotions of what he went through, it was still fascinating to hear what he had to say about this discovery of these archives in Russia. And as he says in the interview, this is probably the last time they will grant access to journalists or investigators who want to know more about the death of Hitler. So it's a fascinating story. Jean-Christophe has done a wonderful job in bringing it to life in this book, and let's hear from him now. Let's hear his incredible story about researching the death of Hitler.
A date which will live in infamy.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen, because nothing will save the Governor General.
There's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. I think we have a terror attack.
This was their finest hour.
Jean-Christophe, thank you for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you on Living History.
Hello, it's my pleasure to talk to you.
The death of Hitler, it's one of the great stories, the great conspiracy theory. I'm really looking forward to delving into this and hearing your feedback about what you feel happened to Hitler in those final days of his life. Before we get started on that, can you just tell us a little bit about your work as a journalist and the work of your co-author?
So, I'm a French journalist. I'm used to work as a reporter from 20 years ago, approximately. And time to time, try to put my investigation to a book. And maybe 5 years ago, I met Lana Parshina, my co-author, who is a Russian and an American citizen, for another book about the children of the dictators in the world. And because she had a big network in Moscow, I turned myself to her to try to open all the archives where the so-called women of Hitler are stored.
What was it that inspired you to write this book in the first place?
It was an opportunity for me that started a few years ago when a French historian told me that he visited the Russian archives during the Yeltsin time in the 90s, and one official at that time showed him a shoebox with inside what it presented as a fragment of the skull of Hitler. When this French historian told me that, I decided to try my best to check by myself if it was true or not. And because it's very complicated when you're not a Russian speaker to negotiate with the Kremlin, I tried to convince Lana to join me in this adventure, and she said yes.
How did you get access to these records and to these fragments of Hitler's skull? How did you negotiate with the Russians to get access to these secret archives?
That is a big question. Technically, obtaining legal and official clearance for the full access of the documents and the human remains were not so complicated. It was doable, but a little bit tricky, because with the Russians, especially now, you have to be to keep in your mind that you can be manipulated by the power. And that's why for each step we negotiate very tightly with the officials. And the problem is the documents and the human remains are not stored in the same archive. They are divided in 3 different places. So for each archive, we were supposed to negotiate again and again. That's why this quest lasted almost 2 years to get only the old clearance for the global access for everything.
What was it like, that moment when you were in the Russian archives, they brought out this box and you opened it and you saw a fragment of human skull that they said belonged to Hitler?
Honestly, it was very weird because we are talking about the reincarnation of the evil. It is it is tough and deeply in my flesh. I could feel something quite unusual for me, something I wasn't very comfortable. After the day, my first day, when I saw these boxes with the skull, I met many nightmares. It's very, very strange to explain, but it's like you are with the scene. It's very complicated. So when the officials arrived with this disc box with inside a fragment of a skull, and they explained to me, for us, we are 100% sure that is Hitler. I was astonished because that took so many times for me to succeed to this point. But despite that, it was very uncomfortable for me. And I had to keep in my mind that I am a journalist. I'm here just to check and double check every information they are giving to us, to Lana and I. So it's a mix of so many feelings in the same time. That's why I decided at that time to convince the officials to let us come again and be more fresh in our spirit, to analyze what we are working on, the document and the human remains.
So tell us exactly what you found in those archives. You had documents, you had photographs, and then you also had human remains and also the remains of a sofa that had been in Hitler's bunker. Is that correct?
Yes. What is absolutely astonished with the Russian archives, that is, they, even for themselves, they do not know exactly what they are in their storage, because nothing it's digitalized. It's not like in Western countries. They don't have enough budget for that. So we have asked to one official. I'm thinking about a special one who is working in the army archives. So this guy, we just convinced him to dig more for us in a special way. And he discovered some new documents, still classified, about the testimonies of the last witnesses of Hitler in his bunker, including his valet, his adjutant, and his pilot, private air pilot. These three people were SS in the Nazi army, and they were the closest people to Hitler until the really last hours of the dictators. And we were, Lana and I, we were maybe the first to read their testimonies to the Soviets, because they were cast when Berlin fell down on the 2nd of May of 45. They were captured by the Soviet army, and secretly they were sent to Moscow in a special jail, and they were tortured many times. And we were maybe the first to read again, more than 70 years after, what they explained to the investigators, the Soviet investigators. So we were quite moved when we realized that, because we were in the big history with a big H.
What happened to those people after they were captured by the Soviets and imprisoned and tortured? Were they eventually released, or did they die in captivity?
No, they were released in 1955 and 56. They were released. Before that, they were convinced by the justice, the Soviet justice, for what is the exact sentence? I think it was humanity crime. I don't know exactly.
Crimes against humanity?
Yes, exactly. They were, because officially there is not death penalty in the Soviet Union. So they were supposed to spend their life in Gulag, in Siberia, or the place in the deep countryland of Soviet Union. But because the Chancellor of the West Germany tried to find a way to negotiate with the Kremlin, so they could be able to be released and to come back to Germany. And the point is, when they arrived in Western Germany, not in the East Germany, they didn't have to be punished by the German justice. So they died comfortably in their bed several years after.
And tell me about the the one of the most interesting things I found in the book was the wood taken from the sofa in Hitler's bunker. That was a bit unexpected, wasn't it?
That is a big yes. And you can't imagine the reaction of our scientists, the French forensic doctor we took with us to examine, to analyze the remains, the evidence, because the officials from the archives, the National Archives, where this material are stored now in Moscow, they manipulate the wood directly with their hands, without any gloves, any protection. So the contamination is total. It's impossible to try to take some sample from the wood, because there are some we can see some broad print, but we are not sure that this blood is the from Hitler, because it's the contamination is total. So we were very disappointed about that point, but thanks to the FSB, the Special Service of Russia, we get the clearance to have an access to their special archive, where the last evidence of Hitler, I'm talking about the teeth, are there. And we were the very, very first to get the official authorization to analyze that and to take some sample to be sure that we are talking about Hitler.
Well, let's ask the big question. Did Hitler escape on a submarine to Argentina, or did Hitler die in that bunker in 1945?
We have the final results of this big question. We have decided from the very beginning of our quest with Lana to compile all the information from the document with the biggest historian in the world, but we prefer to add that with the science, because there is still now so many versions, so many stories about conspiration, about conspiracy, about the possibilities that Hitler vanished or escaped to South of America or Japan. And Stalin explained that to the Allies in the Potsdam Conference. The beginning of this amazing fantasy, amazing legend came from Stalin. But still now, this story for many people is still a possibility. So we thought, thanks to the science, we could be able to prove definitely that is technically Hitler or not. And with the teeth and with the last techniques and the authorization of the Russians, we could take some samples from the Tatar of the teeth, the calculus. And Philippe Charlier, the French scientist, the French forensic doctor, used a special, how to say in English, a scanning electron microscope to be sure that we are not manipulated by the KGB and now the FSB, and the teeth are real, the teeth are from this time, and the teeth are from a male. For us, each step were very important. After that, we realized we knew that Hitler was a vegetarian. So we were looking for any evidence about a flesh print or flesh something in the calculus. We have found vegetables prints, so no flesh. After that, we compare the teeth with the X-ray we found from the dentist of Hitler, who were located in the U.S. now, in the many archives in the U.S. So we compare the design, we compare everything, and we are capable now to announce 100% sure that Hitler shot himself, killed himself with a cyanide pill and a gun in his bunker in April 30th of 1945. He didn't escape. He wasn't capable because he was in so bad shape at that time. He wasn't capable to escape. And we got all the evidence now to stop all this theory about one Hitler who escaped to South of America.
So that's the definitive answer from you, that Hitler did die in that bunker in 1945. He's not living with Elvis Presley in some village in Argentina. He died in 1945.
No, and the other scope of the book, it is that we can prove that, because it was the British version of the first investigation in 45, in October 45. The British version at that time explained that Hitler shot himself in his mouth, and we didn't find any evidence of gunpowder in the calculus. So he didn't shot himself in the mouth, but certainly in the temple, as the witnesses captured by the Soviet explained. They all explained that they found the bodies, the corpse of Hitler with a big hole in the temple. So that is logical, what we have found, but we were the first to prove that with the science. So it's a combination. We have combined the historical facts and the science. And we really hope, Lana and me, that we will shut down off all the other theories.
What do you think will happen, Jean-Christophe, in the future with these human remains, with these important documents that are in the Russian archives? Will there be more investigations in the future? Will there be more research done? Or do you think these items will be locked away again for many decades to come?
It's complicated to imagine what the Russians could do in the really next years. They are quite paranoid right now. With the Putin regime, it's not very stable. Who can imagine? But I can just answer you what they said to us. They said you will be the last who could examine these artifacts, these remains, because for us it's a question of honor. And if you have proved to the Westerners that we are the so-called winner of the Second World War, because for them it's important, because they have the remains of Hitler, they can pretend that they won the Second World War first, before the Allies. And they don't want to give the opportunity to other people, to other researchers, to manipulate this very important to a film. For them, it's like that. It's so important. They prefer. That is why still now the teeth and the skull are not stored in a museum. They are not. You cannot, even if you are a big historian, international historian, you can claim to get this access, but you won't get it. For them, it's a secret. It's still a secret. So I think the teeth will be still stored in the FSB, in the Secret Service in Moscow, and locked. That's all. They said you will be the last one. Even for the Russian journalist, that's over.
Well, it's wonderful that you were able to negotiate this access to these documents and these artifacts, particularly, as you say, if the Russians are going to keep them locked up for the future. It's wonderful you were able to do this research. Why do you think, Jean-Christophe, that people are still so fascinated with this story of Hitler that occurred more than 7 decades ago? Why are we still so interested in knowing what happened in these final days of Hitler's life?
For me, it's not a fascination. There is still a question: how had it happened? How could it be possible to do this kind of horrible things? How a people, a culture, as the German, could become as the sheep with the wolves, because it was almost you cannot imagine that it's possible, but that happened. So still now, I think we are still trying to understand who were these people, this Nazi, and especially the first one, the leader, Adolf Hitler. And he is still the personalization. I don't know if it is the right word in English, but Hitler, I think, is well known everywhere in the world as the evil, as the bad guy. You cannot be more bad than him, I think. So, and because my first question, and I think we forgot that, there is no official picture of the corpse of Hitler and Eva Braun. You can find on internet official picture of Goebbels, of Himmler, of Goering. You have everyone, not Hitler. And because you have no evidence, you have nothing, you can imagine everything. And we have talked about this theory, but still now, I think it is possible, it is, how to say, yes, it is possible to doubt about what happened to Hitler. My book tried to stop that, but the fascination could come from that, from the fact that maybe we don't know everything about what happened to this Hitler, where the really, really bad guy of the 20th century.
Well, I think I speak for everyone when I say we're very grateful for your efforts to investigate the last days of Hitler and
Thanks a lot.
To end this story once and for all, and to end the conspiracy theories. And the book is really wonderful. I really enjoyed reading it. It's a very interesting account. And the book, for everyone listening, the book is available now Australia-wide. It's called The Death of Hitler by Jean-Christophe Brisard and Lana Pashina. It's available Australia-wide now, so certainly go out and get that book. You'll be very glad you did. Jean-Christophe, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on the
Thanks to
program.
you. Thanks.